So thank you for coming. Welcome to this VII Insider panel discussion on artificial intelligence, the threat to the real. My name is David Campbell. I'm the VII Foundation's Education Director, and I also manage VII Insider. VII Insider is a program of the VII Foundation in partnership with PhotoWings. We're coming to you from the home of the VII Foundation, the Alexandra Boulat campus in Arles in France. We have an audience here in the building, but we also have an audience online from around the world. And we'll be looking forward to your questions and comments and contributions after the presentations. We have someone who will go around and with a microphone for people who want to ask questions here, and online people can put questions in the Zoom Q&A box, and we will bring those into the conversation as well. This discussion is part of the VII Foundation's work exploring the challenges and opportunities of technological change in visual journalism. This year, we organized a panel at the International Journalism Festival in Perugia with our friends at Reporters Without Borders and the World Press Photo Foundation, and we will continue to organize events and publish articles on the topic. That's because no change is more significant or happening faster than what we call artificial intelligence. AI has become a catch-all term for several related but distinct technologies. But in its simplest form, as one of our panelists has said, it's a branch of computer science that uses machine learning to conduct what we would normally think about as high-level neurological functions. And ever since generative AI, especially that which allows text to image prompts and functions, emerged about 18 months ago, public attention and concern has become much more intense. The obvious capacity of GPTs, that is generative pre-trained transformer models, to produce photorealistic images and video poses enormous risks for those of us concerned with the production of accurate, authentic, and verifiable images. At the same time, I think visual journalism has an opportunity to be better recognized for its contribution to documentation and reporting as a result of this development. For too long, visual journalism has not had a seat at the table when discussions about the future of journalism generally are taking place. And the obvious risks of synthetic media have paradoxically created an opening for a statement about the importance and necessity of trustworthy imagery. Ever since photography was invented in the early 19th century, the boundary between the real and the unreal, the accurate and the inaccurate, has been contested. In the 21st century, faced with the challenges of AI, we cannot propose returning to a simpler time when, allegedly, and I think mistakenly, everyone believed photos were accurate because that is a misplaced nostalgia. Instead, we have to think through what we want images to do, and we have to do the work to secure their integrity. So today's panel is part of this larger process and this larger conversation, and I'm pleased to welcome on my left, Nicolas Jimenez, Director of Photography of Le Monde, and Santiago Lyon, who's the Head of Advocacy and Education for the Content Authenticity Initiative. There's also Mitalia Conde, who, as you notice, is not with us in person, but last week I recorded an interview with her so that she could be virtually present. So I want to introduce her and then play you that interview as part of the panel. Mitalia is the CEO of AI for the People, and her organization advocates for policies that want to reduce the expression of algorithmic bias, which is one of the greatest challenges facing AI. Mitalia advised the US Congress in 2019 when AI for the People campaigned for the introduction of the Algorithmic Accountability Act. In 2023, she took part in one of Senator Schumer's AI Insight panels. And in 2024, she was one of the civil society leaders helping the Congressional Black Caucus develop its AI policy platform. She's also a visiting fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute and a Harding Distinguished Postgraduate Scholar at Cambridge University. The interview I did with her is about half an hour long, and we're going to publish the full version of that with an article on Dispatches, which is the VII Insider blog. But for this panel, I wanted to show you an extract, which is about 12 minutes, where she covers some of her main points so that she could be part of the conversation. So Natalie, great to have your voice on the panel, even though you couldn't be here in person. A lot of the work that you've done in research, even before setting up AI for the people, was dealing with the idea of racial literacy in the tech industry and in technology. Explain what you mean by racial literacy and why that's so important for tech.
I'm a tech worker. That's my primary identity, even though I do claim filmmaking, because if I had been able to make money, I would be a filmmaker. I wasn't able to, so I had to get a paying job. But I think one of the things that I was seeing was the machines were making all of these horribly racist determinations. The most famous one for me, and the thing that kind of turned my life around, was when Google Photo, as it was called, it's now called Google Images, was in beta. That's before it's widely released to the public in 2015, had ran a series of pictures where they were claiming that through this archive, we were going to be able to see humanity. And there were two pictures of Black teenagers. One was a girl and a boy, and they were kind of like hugging each other. And then one was just a group of young boys. The girl and the boy were labeled as gorillas, and the young boys were labeled as thugs. And that really stood out to me as a Black technologist, because I knew then, as is still true now, is that when we're going through the machine learning process, there is an element of human annotation or note-taking. So a human being had to go into that data set and label Black people as gorillas. What that let me know was that there was a eugenic stream within the tech industry when it came to annotation, which is racism. And when they were labeling the young boys, a human being had to go in and label them as thugs. And not only were these human decisions, but they had to go through various stages of testing, evaluation, quality control. And if you're not aware of this history because you don't live it, then you might not be aware of the fact that it is racist.
Let's have a look at some images that I saw recently in a couple of articles. So these are from a Washington Post article in November 2023, where they use Stability Diffusion XL and put in some prompts. So that when the prompt was toys in Iraq, it returned soldiers with guns. Attractive people returned young and light-skinned individuals. Muslim people returned men with head coverings. A portrait of a person playing soccer returned men, mostly men of color, while cleaning returned women, mostly white women. A person at social services, people of color. A productive person, male and white. And then we have the case, not Stability Diffusion, but of Google's Gemini earlier this year, which started returning Nazi soldiers as though they were people of color. What's going on here? How does race get coded and programmed into the algorithms? Why do these images get produced in response to those prompts? I mean, first of all, the Stability Diffusion ones.
So this is going back to this idea that machine learning as a branch of computer science. And what happens in the machine learning process is that we'll have something that we call a primary data set, a base data set. And within that data set, it's a library of images of all possible ways in which this prompt could be interpreted. So for example, with the men play, it wasn't even men playing soccer or football. With the football prompt, there would have been a collection of people playing football, and it's not likely, honestly, to be our personal pictures, although sometimes it is. Usually what happens is that they scrape the internet. And who gets onto the internet but the famous, the celebrity, the spectacle? And once that database is developed, if you're looking at celebrity soccer pictures, you're looking at specifically a data set of male men of color, because these are the people that are being drafted into those teams. These are the people that from boyhood are being promoted and invested in. And then these are the people that are showing up in FIFA, the World Cup, and all of the African nations, all of these other football venues. And so statistically, when somebody puts in the prompt, people playing football, the data set is biased. It has more men than women because women are less likely to be invested in for any type of sport, particularly football or soccer, depending on where you sit in the world. It's going to be people of color because pathways to education, higher order learn thinking, intellectual pursuits are cut off for many people of color because of underinvestment in, honestly, the brilliance of non-white people globally. And then we have global instability. So if we think about the children right now living in war-torn districts, those kids are not going to school. Those kids are not going to get into the intellectual world. And one of the ways for those kids who will survive, because there will be children always survive in war. So there will be children of these conflicts. It's very unlikely that they're going to be able to adjust in a way. Maybe football is the way for them. And then the third thing is that you're looking at something active, playing. There are going to be more pictures of men being active on the internet than women, just because of sexism. Just because of sexism. And so if we look at that data set, when you put in the prompt, you're not getting people, you're getting the imagination of an internet that has been developed over the last 40 years. And our base language model and image model were started by the Aryan nations in the United States, because they were the first group to get online and engage in online network, what we now call online networking. And they started to do that in the early 80s. So using your internet as your data set means that you're always going to draw from this very particular philosophy and worldview, which underpins the global right.
So because the data set, therefore, is problematic because it's drawing on these histories and these genealogies and so on, is the solution to this does it lie in better data sets, or does the solution need to be also policy, regulatory, etc.? What's the matrix for responding to these problems?
So in the Project Gemini example, which was the last picture, they had a better data set and they had better math, because what we saw with Project Gemini was that they had said, the reason these pictures are racist is that they're not proportional. We want to make it as easy to recover a man as a woman, a Black person as an Asian person, a white person, but it was ahistorical. And this goes back to this techno-social element. Gemini developers started history at the day that they developed that data set. And so they didn't realize that Nazism was white supremacist. And so they would never promote an Asian woman or a Black man to the post of officer. That just doesn't exist. I mean, that doesn't exist. Ask the ones that are out here right now. They're not doing that. That is not their policy. And so what they did was create this better formulas, broader data set, because we saw these diverse Nazis. But what they didn't do was include image makers, historians, anthropologists, and non-technical people in that process. I am somebody that has worked in the product development space for 15 years. I'm a social scientist. My job is not to code the data set. My job is to make sure that when the data set is annotated, that it actually reflects wider society. My job is when we're doing initial testing and I see a Black Nazi to say, look, the engineering is spot on, but this cannot be released because in the social world we live in, this isn't accurate. And the other thing is then to also have policies and regulation, because while the toys in Iraq, the women cleaning, the productive men, those are unfortunate images that come out of systemic failings of society. But I would argue that they're not harmful. I would also argue, as an image maker and as an artist, that things do not need to be lifelike or real like, as long as we know we're not looking at a real image and a real picture, which is something I feel very strongly about. I feel very strongly about the integrity of photography, which is why I am so sad I cannot be with you. But you need to know when something is real in order for us to then process it. So I feel strongly about that. And that can only come through regulation, because unfortunately, when we're looking at things like access to democracy, there are huge dividends to be paid for companies misrepresenting images. And unless they are prevented from doing that through some type of policy framework, we're going to have that. And I'll stop there because this is a big passion for me.
Yeah. If you were still working as a documentary photographer and making films, would you allow your films to be part of a data set to train models? Do you think that people should be getting authentic images into data sets so that models are better trained, or is that a dangerous proposition?
I would say yes and no. I think if there were a system by which filmmakers, image makers could opt in for their model, for their photography to be used, and then also make money from that, then I think that that's a fair exchange. I think the anecdote for bad imagery is good imagery, potentially. There would have to be safeguards. This cannot be used, for me, you cannot use this in political messaging. You cannot use this in ways that are trying to hurt people or mislead people. You cannot use this in ways that are weaponized against anybody. This has to be used for good. But if I'm improving your data set, which we all would be, by the way, famously, one of the things that I always point out, that after OpenAI launched Sora, there's this very famous prompt, which was cat waking up owner. And it's this gorgeous tabby cat lying next to this woman with 5 paws. Authentic photography could have helped train that model to realize cats do not have 5 paws. So there are very real ways that we can improve the systems that are out there, but it has to be a fair and equal exchange. And we cannot allow those people that weaponize imagery and weaponize the archive to get access to better data.
I thought it was important just to bring Mitali's voice in, because I think she has some incredible points about algorithms, racism, bias, and so forth. Let's move on. Nicholas, I wanted to hand over to you and get you to say a few words about how Le Monde is either using or encountering, dealing with, or responding to AI.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm the director of photography of Le Monde daily newspaper. We, as all the news companies and the newspapers in the world, we have a few months ago, we had a huge discussion about what could be or should be the position of the company with AI, and with me, with the position of what could be Le Monde and photography with AI. I have to say, like all the companies, we first said, okay, we will never publish image generated by AI, because we are talking about that, not about AI only, but this kind of images, and we agreed about using words first, meaning not using the word photography, but using the word image generated by AI, because it is what it is. When you publish a photography, you publish a photography made by an author, written with the light. And when you publish an image with made by a generated AI, you publish an image made by a prompt, and it could take like hours. I tried so many times to do like a super realistic image, and it can take hours to make it like super precise. So we first agreed to not use in our articles and in the company the terms photography for this kind of images. And then we said, okay, we will never publish. And the same week, without knowing it, we published an image because in France, we have something called CNRS, which is like a national center of scientific research. And as we have a science supplement, we were publishing an article about a new discovery they did. And for many years, I used to work with artists to draw, to illustrate the articles they were publishing. And they decided to use AI this year. And so we took this image as usual, thinking it was made by an artist, and so we published it. And then we figured out that it was made by AI. And so then it was done. You cannot say anymore, we will never publish AI. And so that brought a second discussion in the company, because there is what we produce, and we are sure about what we produce. And there is all the rest. And you can verify and say, I don't want this, we don't want to publish AI, we don't want to use AI in our photography. But the other, and I had the discussion with the guy at CNRS, and he had great arguments to explain why they decided to use AI, because it's the scientist himself who is creating the image going with his article and with his discover. So it's way more precise than giving a prompt. And that's the word this person used talking to me, to send a prompt to a drawer, an artist who is doing the same. And in fact, I can agree with him. So we had a second discussion at in the company only about images. And I would say, to make a long story shorter, that at the end, and I totally agree with that. I remember when, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, when everybody had a phone in the news companies, we were like, oh, everybody can do a photo. So it's the end of photojournalism, and it's the end of the news with photography in our newspaper. And we decided to take it the same way. It means now everybody can make an image, a photorealistic image made by AI. You only need a connection to do it, so everybody can do it. But we think that the work we produce, the photographer we work with, the photographer we work with in the company, and the photographer we buy the images, more than ever, their photography has a value for us, and for sure for the readers of Le Monde. And what we are selling to our readers, it's not only news, it's trust. And it's first trust and news, because we, as many newspapers in the world, we think that we have to be the safe place for people who wants to know what will happen. It means all day long you can receive images on your mobile phone, but at one point, if you want to know, everyone can have to choose a safe place to check. And that's why I'm not saying enthusiastic, but I think it's a great opportunity for our industry, because our work, what we're doing, as a big value. And I see it every week with my bosses. They are not really photojournalism friendly. I mean, they all, like all the bosses, they think it's too expensive. But now, since there is this topic with AI and photography, they know exactly what it means for our business. So I'm quite sure that if we take good decision after good decision, it can be a good opportunity for all of us.
So Santiago, the Content Authenticity Initiative has been doing incredible work about digital authentication, verification, establishing the credentials for images. Tell us a bit more about how it's working and in particular, how it's engaging with the challenge of AI.
Sure. Thank you, David. Great pleasure to be here today, especially here at this Alexandra Boulat campus. Alexandra was a friend of mine many years ago, and she left us way too soon. So it's remarkable and heartening to see that her name lives on through the work of the VII Foundation and the VII Academy. By way of introduction, I've spent the last 4 decades working in photography. I now head up advocacy and education for this initiative that I'm about to run you through. But before that, I was vice president in charge of photography at the Associated Press for almost 15 years, overseeing an army of about 1,000 photographers, producing about 1 million pictures a year, telling the world's story, all of those images authentic and truthful. And before that, I was a photographer in the field for 20 years, including a decade spent covering war and conflict around the world. I photographed 9 wars on 4 continents, often at very high cost, psychologically, physically, and like many of us in that industry, lost a lot of friends in service of truth and authenticity. So my commitment to this area runs very deep. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so running you through what this initiative is and how it works, because we've heard different perspectives here today. Obviously, we live in a world of technological change, some of which will likely be beneficial, but sometimes can be harmful, especially in the hands of bad actors with nefarious agendas. So it's heartening to be working on something like this, which I believe offers a glimmer of hope. This initiative was kicked off by Adobe in late 2019, so we've been at this for a little while now, really in response to these perennial problems of mis and disinformation, which have been with us for a long time, but have been exacerbated with the advent of generative AI, and are starting to create images that are indistinguishable from quote unquote real images. And since Adobe makes a lot of very powerful software that can facilitate this kind of thing, we felt it was incumbent upon us to try and do something about it. And we wanted to do it in a way that would benefit everybody, not just Adobe. So pretty much everything you're about to see is open source, meaning that anybody and everybody can use it, including Adobe's business competitors. The community has grown significantly since those early days in late 2019, early 2020. As you can see here, we're working with a host of organizations, news media companies, both news agencies as well as consumer-facing organizations. But beyond that, advertising agencies, technology companies, hardware, software, and of course, VII is part of this work. And so we think it is the weight, size, and heft of this community that is really going to help this initiative succeed. So the first thing that we wanted to do when we got started here was look at some pillars. And the first pillar we decided to look at was the area of detection, which involves analyzing imagery or other digital file types to look for telltale signs of manipulation. And we determined that while detection could be useful, it was not really a durable solution, in part because it's not scalable, it's not particularly accurate, and invariably it's an arms race with bad actors staying one step ahead of the latest detection software. So instead, we focused in on 3 other areas. I'll speak briefly to each of them. Policy is the first one. This involves briefing lawmakers and policymakers around the world to make sure that they're well informed about technologies existent and coming. And the reason that that's important is what we're starting to see now is legislation around the world that will likely mandate some level of transparency around AI. And we think it's important that those lawmakers be well informed. So I spend some of my time, I was here about a month ago speaking to the digital ambassador at the French Foreign Ministry. I've been down talking to the members of Congress in the United States, trying to educate our lawmakers as to the state of play. The next area we're looking at is education. In education, we're thinking really about three different types of education. Classroom education around media literacy, which is a very irregular area. In some countries, it's taught quite well, but in most countries, it's not taught well if it's taught at all. And so we're working with educational organizations to create free curricular materials to help young people and educators, make that go forward. The other two areas of education are around societal education, as this technology that you're about to see rolls out, making sure people are aware of it. And the third would be what we would call consumer education. Dear reader of Le Monde, here's how you can tell if something is AI generated or not. But the focus here really primarily is on this notion of provenance. And in this context, provenance refers to the basic facts about where digital files come from. How might they have been manipulated along their journey, and then sharing some or all of that with the viewer. So provenance then becomes really about proving what's real. In other words, identifying things as they are, as opposed to detecting what's false. And our journey thus far has been quite interesting. We've been working with creators around attribution. The creative community is interested in getting proper attribution for their work. We've been working with news media companies around veracity and bolstering this trust model that Nicolas spoke about. We've been working with generative AI companies to get them to label their output properly. But beyond that, increasingly, we're hearing from corporations who are interested in brand reputation and consumer protection, insurance companies, auditing companies, and a whole host of other examples that you can see there on the screen. And what that tells us is that in this day and age, there is currently pretty much zero empirical evidence about the origins of anything that we see online. And so we choose to trust things or not based on habit, hearsay, gossip, rumor, existing trust models, etc. And while sometimes those things can serve us well, the big disruptor now, of course, is AI, because AI creates what is sometimes referred to as the liar's dividend. In other words, if I tell one lie about one thing, it can mean or imply that everything else can be a lie. And it's cast the shadow of doubt over everything because we're no longer sure about what we're looking at. And there's very little information to help us, which is why we're doing this work. So how does this work? How does this technology actually work? I'm going to introduce this term now that you'll start to hear more and more of, called content credentials, which comes from an underlying technical organization that I'll speak to in a second. Content credentials is sort of like a digital nutrition label, in the same way that when you go to the supermarket and buy a packaged food stuff, you can quickly see what's in the food, how many calories, how much sugar, how much salt, etc. This is a way to do that with digital content. And so in order to make this work, we've divided the labor up into a number of areas, starting with capture. Here, what we're doing is working directly with camera manufacturers and smartphone manufacturers to integrate this technology into those actual hardware devices on production, which allows us to say this picture was actually made with a particular camera. Next, we move on to editing, and we're basically incorporating this into editing software, both Adobe and non-Adobe, because of the open source nature here. And what this allows the user to do is see what changes were made to a digital file in the editing process. So let's say I crop an image, tone it, darken it, lighten it, whatever I might do to it. It allows me to keep a record of that information and go back and review it later. The picture started out with blue sky and ended up with red sky. How did that happen? The next area we're working with is publishers of all kinds, and particularly the content management system providers of those publishers. And the goal here is to leave all of this information alone, because currently lots of information in the form of metadata gets stripped off of pictures at every turn. But by leaving it alone, we can then share some or all of the information through what we call this content credential, indicated by that little CR icon. And so when we dig down into the content credentials, you can see at every step of the way, we can get quite granular about the level of information we can capture. But of course, we recognize that not everybody wants to share all of this information. And in some cases, they probably shouldn't for privacy reasons, security reasons, etc. So for example, the photojournalist working in a war zone would be ill-advised to share their GPS location because, as we've seen in the past, that can make them a target with fatal consequences sometimes. So ultimately, this is all customizable, and the user and the publisher can choose how much or how little information they want to share. But this CR icon is what we're seeking to make ubiquitous in the same way that the copyright symbol or the Creative Commons symbol is ubiquitous, indicating that a digital file, whether it's a photo or a video or an audio file, has underlying information that the viewer can then access to make better informed decisions about what it is they're looking at. This is a little bit technical, but for those interested in the technical aspects, we start off with assertions. This is what was done to a file, by whom, etc. And then we use what's called tamper-evident metadata, metadata that if you mess with it, it's obvious that you have. And we use this metadata to bind or to attach the assertion to the image. And then in addition, we have invisible watermarking as another layer of security. So the content credential then becomes this bundle of assertions, metadata, invisible watermarks, and digital signatures. Digital signatures is a sort of a relatively new technology. You can think about it like a digital passport. It's how you established who you are online, and there are many companies who offer that service. So then the question becomes, where does the content credential live? And it can be stored in the file. It can also be stored on the cloud, and if we do that, we're also able to store a thumbnail of the file on the cloud, which allows for a third level of security, meaning we can recover the content credential using what we call fingerprinting technology. And the third option is on the blockchain or distributed ledger for those who are interested in that. But our recommendation just for security here is that there are three components of resilience to the credential: the tamper-evident metadata, the invisible watermarking, and the fingerprinting. And those things together have proven to be durable and about as secure as you can get right now. The other thing we're offering creators as well is this notion to add a do not train label to their content. Because one of the big problems that creators and journalists generally are facing is that the generative AI companies are scraping their material without their knowledge and permission and using it to train their models. And in the court cases thus far, the plaintiffs have not had any success because the courts generally say, well, your material was used for training without your permission. That's true, but can you prove that your material is present in the output from those models? And while that technology is underway, and we'll get there eventually, at the moment, it's not easy to show that. So by adding a do not train label, it's another layer or another recourse for creators to protect their content. Now, in the AI space, which is really what we're focused on here, we're making good headway. Adobe plays in that space with a product called Firefly, very similar to Midjourney, Stability, OpenAI, Bria, etc. And with Firefly, let's say you were to come across this image online of penguins in the desert, you would click on the content credential and it would tell you that this is an AI-generated image. The good news is Adobe does that since the inception of our generative AI technologies, and now OpenAI, who make DALL-E 3, are doing that as well. So all of OpenAI's output in the generative space now comes with content credentials. For archival cases, we can use this to retrofit content credentials to existing digitized archives, add them in the scanning process, display them on archival interfaces, and attach them upon download of archival assets. So we're able to apply this retrospectively or retroactively as well. But all of these technologies come from an underlying standards organization called the C2PA. This is an organization that was founded by Adobe and a host of other companies you see here, and it sits within the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation is the preeminent open standards organization in the world. And so what this means is all of this technology is open source. It doesn't belong to anybody. And as a result, it's accessible to anybody and everybody. And that makes it very attractive in the digital ecosystem because it doesn't imply a dependence on other companies. Adobe's on the steering committee, chairs the technical working group, and a little over 2 years ago, we released a version 1 of this technical specification. We're about to release version 2.1. And more recently, we saw that Meta and Google and OpenAI and TikTok have all announced implementation of this technology to one degree or another. And the reason that's good is because it shows that the C2PA, because of the open source nature of it, has emerged as sort of a gold standard in the provenance space. which is encouraging. So the way that we distinguish between these two organizations then is that the C2PA is, if you like, the architect's blueprint upon which everything is based, and the Content Authenticity Initiative is two things. It's a construction company making open source tools to facilitate implementation of the C2PA standard, but it's also a vibrant community, as you saw earlier, of over 3,000 members sharing best practices in order to make this technology ubiquitous, because we think that that is really the long-term solution here. AI will continue to evolve, and that's fine, but people need to be able to distinguish between what's AI and what's not AI. The camera companies are all making good progress here. Leica was the first company out with a production secure capture device. Sony and Nikon will probably have stuff out later this year. Canon and Fuji are also working on it. We're also talking to all the smartphone manufacturers. So good progress there. We're also starting to see implementation here on LinkedIn and TikTok and Meta. A little bit imperfect on occasion, but still progress. And now I'm going to wrap up showing you a little 1-minute video that gives you an indication of how this might work going forward. So what you're going to see here is a picture in Photoshop. I'm going to manipulate it significantly, and then going to publish it to a mocked up social media site, and then I'm going to interact with it, and you'll see the capability here. So I start here in Photoshop. I enable content credentials. I inspect this image. It already has a content credential because Adobe Stock now tags all their stuff. Now what I'm going to do is manipulate the image significantly, starting with the color, cool down the colors. I'm going to use some AI, add some completely artificial clouds to the background. Now I'm going to overlay another image on top here. I'm going to clear up the background. And all of a sudden, I have a picture showing the pyramids in a blizzard, which it hasn't happened yet, but it might. Now I'm going to export this. I'm going to publish this to the cloud. I export it. Now imagine it pops up on a social media site. I see the snowy pyramids. I hit the credential. I can see it was done in Photoshop. And now when I hit inspect, I can see the sort of genealogy, the family tree of the image. And then with this little slider, I'm able to see what did I start with and what did I end up with. So this is a functionality that is starting to emerge, starting to get adopted, and we think that over the next little while, we'll see some critical mass here. And then just lastly, to underscore these 3 key pillars, because we don't think that you can talk about technology in isolation as a solution. By itself, it's certainly useful, but it won't get the job done. So we've started to think about this as provenance being a key pillar, made up of metadata, watermarking, and fingerprinting, thinking about education as a key pillar, media literacy, societal education, and consumer education, and thinking about policy as a key pillar, policy, forming it, implementing it, and enforcing it. And we think that those 3 pillars give us a fighting chance here to keep the internet a safer place and to address the threats and harms, as well as the benefits of AI going forward. So that's the initiative in a nutshell. If there's a call to action from me, it's to join us. Membership of this initiative is free. We welcome anybody, individuals, companies, businesses, whoever you are. Join us. It allows you to become part of the community, get up-to-date information about what's happening, and contribute in whatever way is appropriate. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's time for questions. We'll start if there are questions in the room, and then we'll go to if there are any questions from people online, we'll bring those in. Who would like to start? Lady second row. Nico will bring around a microphone for you.
Thank you all. That was an excellent summary of what we can look forward to for the future, and especially as an image maker. The question for the panel really is, we have a multi-generation that do not trust, let's say, traditional media. When you ask them, well, where do you get your news media and your information? Oh, my friend told me, or tic-tac-toe and all the rest. How do we attract these viewers, these people that are consuming what they think is the truth, which we know is tampered in a variety of different ways, biased to their particular prejudices, that they learn to be critical thinkers and to go beyond what seems obvious and easy access and not trust traditional media?
Thank you for the question. Well, it's a tough question because you cannot say to people what they have to do, what they have to see, what they have to, on which platform they have to check the news. We are all, I think, Le Monde, but the other news company on TikTok, trying to explain what we are doing. But education for me is the key. I mean, there is no problem. Sometimes I'm on TikTok and also watching Shitty's video, and that's fine. I mean, the main point here is the way you take it, and the one how do you say the one provenance of news for people is not good. So we try to, for example, in Le Monde, we are part of a system like all the journalists of the company. We have to go in schools to explain what journalism is, what photojournalism is, why it's not the same with the news on they can have for free on TikTok, they can have for free on Instagram, and we try to not doing it saying, oh, it's bad to go on Instagram, or it's bad to go on TikTok, or it's bad to go on this platform, because everybody is free to go. And I have niece, for example, they don't give a shit about what I'm doing in life, and that's fine. But at one point, if we hook 1 or 2 kids in the classroom, we did our part of the job. But we cannot fight against the news. The only thing we can do is to be sure that the news we are giving are trustable, and this way we try to answer all the questions the readers are sending to us. On the live, for example, we have like a live news on our website. It started very small, and now we have like every day 2 or 3 lives on news, and it's crazy. The people are on this live. It's free. You don't have to be you don't have to pay anything to go on this live, and you can ask any question, and you have 10 or 15 journalists the other side at the company who are answering. This is our way to prove that they can trust the news, and we explain why this news they heard, I don't know where, is not good, or why it's partly good. But there is no one way to be sure that all these people will stop to check news on TikTok and fake news. I mean, fake news is old like news. I mean, I remember before AI, for example, when Bin Laden died, I remember the picture we all received like this on our email, saying it was the photo of Bin Laden just killed by the US, and in fact it wasn't. So it wasn't a photo made by AI. It was an older photo. They changed a little bit the dark to not recognize the image. But I mean, fake news, you will never. I mean, we will never win the war against people who want to give the population fake news. What we can do in Le Monde, for example, is to be sure that the people understand and can understand, and that's why what you're doing is so important. They can come and then can check anytime what we are doing is for the best we can, the truth and what we saw, or what our collaborators or collaborators. Yes, thank you. So yes, I'm not sure I'm answering the old question because it's like huge, but.
If I could add to that, I think news companies have a tremendous opportunity to meet the newer generations of news consumers where they are, because most young people will never visit a news website. They will certainly never pick up a piece of paper with news printed on it. And so when you sort of look at how news companies are engaging with TikTok or Instagram Reels, they're starting to wake up and recognize that actually those platforms can be very useful because it allows you to compress a lot of information into a very short amount of time, which is important because attention spans have changed. And so, you know, the data tell us that on a mobile device, you have about 3/4 of a second to grab somebody's attention. And then you can generally keep their attention for about 60 seconds. After 60 seconds, half of the audience drops off, which means you have to tell complicated stories in 60 seconds. The reason that that's possible is because those platforms allow you to combine video, audio, data visualization, maps, fonts, a whole host of things. And I've spent a lot of time on TikTok lately, probably too much time, to the point where it was disrupting my sleep. But what I discovered was that most mainstream news organizations are not using TikTok effectively. A few are, but when I ask my kids, where do you get your news? They say TikTok. I say, okay, but who? And what it is typically is people who are taking news from reputable sources and using TikTok effectively to tell those stories in very short amounts of time. And those people have millions of followers when the TikTok accounts of mainstream media organizations have very few followers. So it tells you that there's an opportunity there for news companies to really leverage those platforms, meet the viewers where they are, and make sure that reliable information continues to get injected into the news ecosystem. But they're also competing against AI, as we've seen. And yesterday, I was a little bit surprised to see on TikTok an AI feed coming from the European Soccer Championships, which are currently underway. And it was AI manipulated pictures and video of you know, sports personalities, the coaches of some of these national teams, saying completely outrageous, untrue things. And you're supposed to, you know, understand that that's not real, which is why I'd like to think the work we're doing around allowing people to see that for themselves is useful, but it's complicated.
Thomas, you had a
question. So I have two questions, a separate question, but I'd love to just follow up on that previous thought also. And I don't think all of the responsibility should be placed on news organizations. If you imagine the ecosystem that shares information around the world, it's dominated by these huge tech companies now. Imagine if water was dominated by 5 different companies. I think we need pure, reliable information in the same way that we need pure, reliable water. And so I think we could put more demands on them for transparency in their algorithms, for standard practices. And I think more pushback needs to be done on them, that we're not fighting against them and always trying to trick the algorithm and figure things out and always one step behind to try to get good information. It's sort of, if the world is to work properly, if our societies are to work properly, I think we can demand that there is like a base level of information and information sphere that we can rely on. So that was one. And then the second thing is very specifically with the tools that you showed, Santiago. At what point do you have to get online if you want to use them? So I'm just thinking of these kind of off the grid circumstances, like you're in Antarctica or you're in a country that's under surveillance. If you want to edit your photo and you want to keep the credential chain intact, do you have to be online editing it, or can you edit it on your machine and then only go online when you're ready to publish?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we spent a lot of time talking about threats and harms and the manipulation of these technologies by bad actors. And so there are real concerns about the weaponization of this technology and the use of this technology to go after individuals or to keep information out of certain countries. And so one of the nuances that I didn't get into in the presentation, because it's sort of a little bit in the weeds, but it's the separation of the notion of how you create a digital file from who actually does the creation. So we think about the how and the who, and some of the bigger members of this sort of community or coalition, if you like, have been very concerned about the weaponization. And so as a result, the underlying C2PA technical standard has now been bifurcated to allow for separation of the who from the how for those who are not interested in the who. Obviously, news media organizations are very concerned about the who because that's their whole trust model, right? This comes to you from CNN or the New York Times or or whoever. In answer to your other question, yes, it is possible to do some of these edits online. It gets a little bit complicated in the sort of the guts of the credential because of timestamps and allowing you to ascertain at what moment something was generated, but we're working to see how we can address that.
I think at the start, David, I don't want to misquote you. You said something about how AI has created an opportunity for documentary photography with regard to images and trust. Is that, yeah. And I guess I was thinking also about how it's maybe created an opportunity with regard to representation, because it's really shown a light on just how imbalanced the representation of the world is. And I guess that makes me sort of think about, with the knowledge that these technologies do often trawl the internet for images, where does the responsibility then lie with image makers to be thinking about how do we expand that data set, not just, in case our images are trawled, but for technologies, but also in our collective consciousness, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the point I was making about the opportunity is principally that I think there have been debates about the future of journalism for a very long time, given the advent of digital technology and, basically destroying traditional gatekeepers because of the way the internet has functioned and so on. And visual journalism and photojournalism has not been part of that conversation ever, really. And if it's thought about, it's been thought about as illustration after the fact. Yeah, we have to worry about that. And it's a strange paradox to me, given the way that images play such a role in attracting people to what were front pages and now home pages and scrolling and so on and so forth. So I think the paradox for me is that since ChatGPT became part of popular consciousness, and then you're seeing all those photorealistic images and the generation of video, people are like, holy cow, images are important, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, wake up. It's been that way for a long time. But now that's really giving us the opportunity to be at the table in those discussions. And that's what I think we need to do. I mean, I think Mitali's point and, the longer interview, I think, contains a lot more information about this. That's why I asked her, is like, because she is a documentary filmmaker and a photographer as well before she was a tech worker. I said, would you allow your images, so it's the question of, would you put a do not train tag on or would you allow them to be trained? And, she's got a yes and no answer about that. There's a difficult question about that. But I also think one of the things here, of course, is that we're talking about some of the really large language models like ChatGPT, OpenAI, so on and so forth. What's increasingly probably going to happen with media companies is that they're going to develop their own GPTs and they're going to have their own database to produce work. So a lot of these major problems come from the trawling of the internet that Mitali is talking about and what you're referencing. But if it's going to be a useful tool, the tool is going to be most useful when you have authentic content to put into a database that you then use and you may license to other people and so on. So there's going to be a big difference between the huge commercial GPTs and the more specialist ones, all to do with the quality of data input for that. But I was interested in her answer that she could argue actually both ways at the moment as to whether or not you would allow your images to be trained. Helene, we're going to bring in a question or two from the online audience, and then we will keep going and alternating between the two. So Helene, do you want to ask some of those?
Yeah, we have a few questions that came in online. First one being, has there been any significant strides made in removing images that were scraped without permission or compensation from the databases of OpenAI and others?
So the question was, I don't know if everybody heard it, whether there has been any progress in terms of creators' ability to remove images from data training sets. As far as I know, no, because the burden of proof, at least in the court cases up till now, has been on the owner of the intellectual property. And it's right now impossible practically for the owner of an image to say, oh, look, I can see a few pixels of my image or a few elements of my image in the output of DALL-E 3 or any of these other cases. Now, the technology to do that does exist, but it's currently very expensive and very slow. And I imagine over time there will be the ability to do that, but it's probably a couple of years away, if not longer. So for the moment, the plaintiffs in all of the court cases have had no relief. Even though it's provable, there's an interesting website, if anybody cares to look, called haveibeentrained.com. And you can upload your images to that website, and it will tell you if they've been used in data training sets. And you'd be surprised what's been used, because pretty much everything has been used. So it's a work in progress, I would say.
Thank you. There's another question. This one comes from Neil Jackson. He asks, what about content users who refuse to follow developed industry standards? Is in the end all this dependent on government forcing compliance?
Yeah, ubiquity is definitely how we would define success in a world where everything would carry content credentials, and the absence of content credentials would be indicative that something was amiss. And we think that that's really going to be the way forward, because what we've seen in the digital space, broadly speaking, is that there are followers and leaders, like in any field. But now we've got some bigger players who are taking on leadership roles. And I think it's going to be a follow the leader case, in part because of the doubt that exists online now. You just don't know what you're looking at. And that's, not only affects journalism, but as I indicated earlier, it pretty much affects everything. How does an insurance company know that the picture of your flooded basement that you send to accompany an insurance claim is your flooded basement and not something you generated on AI, for example, or things of that nature? So I think that provenance will become foundational for just about everything digital. It's going to take a little bit of time, but eventually we'll get there, and it will be the absence of provenance information that will cause people to question content. But as I was mentioning before, the technology in and of itself is only part of the solution. It necessarily involves education and policy. When those three things come together, then I think something can be done. In the same way that, the actual nutrition label is a good example. That's mandated now by most governments around the world, that foodstuffs have to have accurate labels telling the consumer what's in them. And that's become a standard. And we think that this will, over time, become a digital standard.
Come back to a couple of questions in the room with the gentleman in the white t-shirt. No? Good. Next question.
Hi, so you mentioned how you were working with camera companies such as Sony and Leica for content authentication credentials through the hardware of cameras. But do you think these credentials could be available to older models of cameras through firmware updates, or is this only going to be something for new cameras?
It's going to be both. The standard will become ubiquitous in new cameras, but Sony, for example, released a firmware update a couple of months ago that allows this to be retroactively applied to older models. There's probably going to be a threshold there in terms of which models, like how far back can you go. So there is going to be a sort of a period in which things will become grandfathered in. But it's also important to note that the provenance trail doesn't necessarily need to start in the camera. In other words, the provenance trail can start in the camera, and that's arguably the most robust implementation of it because it's the source. You can also establish the provenance trail in the editing process. So when you're editing an image and you know it's your image and you want to let the world know that it's your image and these are the things that you did to it in the editing process, you can add a content credential, as you saw in the little demonstration I showed. And then the provenance can also be added upon publication. There's a way to automate provenance information when a major news organization publishes, a series of pictures. That information is probably a little bit less robust in that it might only say this picture came from Le Monde or from the New York Times or whoever, but it's a way to start, right? Because you need to get the ball rolling. And so the analogy we sometimes use is, if you add a content credential upon publication, it's a little bit like reversing a van into a loading dock. And for the moment, you're putting one box in the van. And then as use of the editing software becomes more ubiquitous, and as the availability of the secure capture cameras become more ubiquitous, then you're effectively adding information or adding boxes into that van to a point where it'll be fully loaded and there'll be as much information as possible. And then in the generative AI space, of course, the addition of content credentials when you create something in Firefly or DALL-E or any of these other programs. Because what we're about to see now, some of you may be familiar with it, is a program that OpenAI is about to release, a text-to-video generator called Sora. There have been a couple of teasers about it, some ads made with it, etc. Sora is, depending on your point of view, exhilarating or terrifying, because it allows you to create hyper-realistic video with a few text prompts. And we've always thought of video as being sort of, having taken over from photography in terms of what's believable. Like once upon a time, the picture never lied. Well, now we know the picture can lie. But video never lies because it's moving and it's got sound. Well, that's all about to change. And so it's going to get a little wild and crazy. And the other thing, just, generative AI has only been around for 18 months or so. So if we think about using our imaginations a little bit, which unfortunately in my view, we don't do enough, imagine what this is going to be like in 5 years. It's going to be completely bonkers. And so the ability to at least lift up the hood of proverbially what you're looking at and inspect where it came from, I think is going to be more important than ever.
So the 5-pawed cat photograph that Mitali talked about was one of the Sora teasers. So in the beginning, the teaser contained an error, but you can be pretty sure that that's going to improve dramatically very, very quickly, I think. More questions? Anybody else? Helene, you want... let's do 2 online and then 1 there, and that will bring us... Let's do the online first, and then we'll come back to you. And that'll bring us to the end of our time. So give us a couple of the online ones.
We have a question from Therese B. She asks, do you think there will be a fusion of what you're talking about and the praxis within news media and the opposite tendencies within the making of photo books, printed or ebooks, to not have text to go with images?
Nicholas. Can you repeat that one?
Of course. Do you think there will be a fusion of what you're talking about and the praxis within news media and the opposite tendencies within the making of photo books, printed and ebooks, to not have text to go with the images?
I'm not hearing good. I'm sorry.
I will ask another question. No problem. No problem.
You get it?
We have another question from Patrick. He asks, what is the best piece of advice I can offer high school journalism students about AI and visual journalism? Not to ask a big question here.
Yeah, totally.
Yes, please.
Know your enemy, if you like. Play with this stuff. Show of hands, how many people in the room have played with, generative AI programs, OpenAI, DALL-E? Okay, maybe half. I would encourage everybody to experiment with this stuff. You can get online. Some of them are starting to charge now, which capitalism, what are you going to do? But there's still ways to experiment with this stuff and understand its capabilities and familiarize yourselves and your students with what's out there, so that they can make better informed decisions about whether they love it, hate it, want to involve with it, how it works, etc. So I would say embrace it. It doesn't mean you have to use it. It doesn't mean you have to like it, but you should at least experiment with it, I would say.
Hi, it's a bad final question. I'm German, so I'm very direct. What makes you so confident in suggesting trust in traditional media, especially after the last 10 months? Do we have bigger problems than AI when it comes to trusting traditional media outlets? You mentioned the New York Times as an example, as a safe place for trust, and I'm kind of very gaslit and confused right now.
It's not easy to answer this question because I mean everyone is free to trust or not trust. I mean, if you think that a media is lying to you, what can I say? I mean, I'm not working at the New York Times. I'm working at Le Monde. Every single day, I receive like 10, 20, 50 emails saying this image is not real. You made it fake. You told this and it's not true. I mean. I know the company I work for, and I know how important for us is to work with people we trust. That's the first trust we have. Is I don't work with photographers. I work with photographer I know, and that's the best key I have to be sure that what I'm showing, the story I'm telling to the people, are true. I mean, for what is true, I mean, it's still a photographer on the ground witnessing something. So, I mean, there is obviously a filter like this person, but I trust this journalistic point of view on the situation. And we try at Le Monde to answer any question of the people. Every time someone is doubting about what we're showing, talking about photography, we're answering. But I cannot convince you if you think we are liar. I cannot convince you we are not, because I'm not gonna take 80 years of our story to tell you, okay, this time we made a mistake. This time we did it wrong. This time we did something, and finally it wasn't the truth. Because as you can imagine, you will always find some mistakes we did. But as an historian can have like, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 100 years to study what happened and to tell exactly what happened, we most of the time have few hours. So for sure we make mistakes. But the point is, when we make mistakes, we say it, and we say it the same way we did the mistake. But the question of the truth, I mean, for me, it's a little bit easy to say, okay, all the medias are building up stories. And I mean, most of the time, these people, they say that and then go to see some news on TikTok. And if there is something who is building up stories, and I can tell you now, because as you know, we are in the middle of election in France. If you go on TikTok now, you are in France. You will probably have a very nice video of Jordan Bardella talking with Marine Le Pen about how funny it was, this meeting and everything. So, I mean, the trust is really the key for us. And the first trust is the people we are working with. And for me as a photo director, they are the photographer. We're not working with photographer we don't know. We're not working with agencies we don't know. We have so many discussions, for example, with agencies like AFP, which is the biggest news agency in France and one of the biggest in the world, because they are now selling photos from people we don't know. And they are in the same basket. I mean, for people in my team, they have a look and they are making researches, and these images are coming with the images from AFP photographers. And that's a big problem for us. So doing the best we can to show the people and to not disappoint them every time they come and they ask questions. I told you we have a live, for example, and most of the time the people, they come on the live and they say, okay, I just saw on internet that this news, is it true? And if you have a look on our website, you will see most of the time the answer is, we cannot tell you now, we are checking. And if you come in 10 or 15 minutes, we will be able to answer. And that's the best way to not disappoint people, because we only talk when we are sure about what we're talking. And I'm sure all the big news company are doing the same, but I'm not responsible of what they are doing. We all try to do our best. That's what I can do.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, because at the heart of it, I think it tries to address, or the question is asking, if I understood it correctly, around bias and how information is filtered. and information is filtered largely through journalists. And we all have bias, whether we're working for the New York Times or, whoever is employing a journalist. The journalist has an inherent bias based on their own circumstance, where they grew up, what culture they were exposed to, what happened to them in their life. We all have that. And it's important to recognize that. And for that reason, I think we really get back to the heart of the matter with the notion of education, and trying to educate people that it's probably not a good idea to trust just one source of news, as famous or as well known as that source of news might be, because august and respected news organizations, get things wrong. And so, it's a lot to ask of young people to compare and contrast news and to look at multiple different news sources in order to get a more complete picture of what's going on. I recognize that, but I think it's very important, because what we're starting to see, and we've seen it for a long time now, is how political parties and politicians are using social media to change minds. I just came from Spain, where Vox, the right-wing party in Spain, extreme right-wing party in Spain, very effective use of TikTok to get their message across. Obviously, it's often a xenophobic, misogynistic, horrible message from my perspective, but it's a very effective way of trying to change young people's minds about who to vote for. And in the absence of sort of that intellectual rigor around asking young people to compare and contrast information, they will be swayed by that and they will vote accordingly. And we're seeing all over the world this sort of shift towards populist politics, driven to some degree by effective use of social media tools. So education, I think, is absolutely fundamental here. And when you look at media literacy in the sort of broader education world, curiously enough, Finland is probably best in class when it comes to media literacy education. They expose people kids as young as 5 and 6 to media literacy training. Why? Because they have Russia as a neighbor and they're getting bombarded with all sorts of nonsense. The rest of the world, sadly, media literacy is either not taught at all or is taught imperfectly. And that, I think, is a huge responsibility on our politicians and our leaders to make sure that the population is well informed. Now, the skeptic or the cynic in me might say, well, do they really want a well-informed population? Is that really in the best interests of politicians? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But for me, at its core, it comes down to education.
So that unfortunately brings us to the end of our time. I would like to thank Mutale for her time last week for the interview. As I said, the full version of that we will publish on Dispatches, the VII Insider blog, which you can find on Substack. I'm going to set myself a deadline that has to be by the end of next week. So that's my own pressure. In particular, I'd like to thank Nicholas and Santiago for their time and their presentations today. But also, I would especially like to thank the online audience for joining and for you coming for this discussion. We have 2 more panel discussions this week, one tomorrow, 1500 hours on journalism safety, one on Friday on the politics of representation, thoughts inspired by this exhibition, Monumental. But Nicholas, Santiago, thank you very much.